Good morning and welcome to the Eclectic Radical. As always, I'm Chris Richards, the Eclectic Radical. Alex Suarez was supposed to be with me today, but there seems to have been a miscommunication somewhere, and for the moment, I'm alone. We'll see if Alex shows up. I will try to keep the show going with my own content in the meantime. If anyone in the chat has anything that they want to bring up that's been in the news this past week, I am happy to comment on that. And I will try to keep this going as best I can in the meantime. It's been a long week for me. I've been working sick and shorthanded, missed a couple of days. But okay, I see this reference and I don't understand it. Jamal Bowman fire alarm? That requires more information that I don't completely have. I'm sorry. I would need a link to know what's going on with that one. The main thing I am aware of at the moment this week is the ongoing attacks on public education and banning of books around the country. And of course, all the usual annoying. What do you think about Jamal Bowman's excuse for pulling the fire alarm during a vote? I didn't know that he did pull a fire alarm during a vote, and I didn't know that there was an excuse. So again, I don't know anything about this to comment. The only thing I know about Jamal Bowman is that he was aggressively in favor of Israel when he was running for office the first time, but suddenly he thinks that it's an apartheid state and now AIPAC doesn't like him, so he seems to have grown as a person, right? Yeah, I'm not up on the latest congressional gossip. I'm sorry, folks. I don't really follow any of the progressives in Congress on Twitter, and I don't really read a lot of the clickbait about them. So I'm not up on this at all. I apologize. I do think that pulling the fire alarm during a vote is the sort of thing that I expect in business as usual Congress to avoid having to get a vote on the record or something like that. I mean, that was the sort of joke that people made about Congress for years. I'm kind of surprised that reality is that on the nose, but I guess nothing should surprise me anymore, right? We live in the world where, on the one hand, Democrats can openly say, hey, the Republicans are fascists. But on the other hand, they say, but we still need a strong Republican Party. So I'm not very up to speed on the partisan stuff. I will say I will say that I saw the news item this week about Cornell West holding a high-priced fundraiser, and I've seen the defenses of it as politics as usual, while also seeing the people for Cornell West account on Twitter take a stand and criticize the campaign. That was nice to see. It's sort of depressing that the response to that was mostly snark from Peter Dow on Twitter, but the world is what it is. I don't expect electoral politics to get better anytime soon. That's why I said this past week that if we really had democratic elections, the PSL, the Party for Socialism and Liberation, would be on the ballot in all 50 states. The fact that they're not is because we live in a society where we've left it up to political parties themselves to even be on the ballot, and we have no real national system for organizing democracy in any democratic way. It's all based on private clubs that want to influence the system by pooling their money. And that has to be understood as the basis for liberal electoral politics. It's really something that we have to understand, is that liberal electoral politics is a system by which social clubs pool their money to influence the system and sort of control the voters' choices. We have a Republican choice and a Democratic choice, and we have some third-party choices that vary from state to state. The only state where you can just pay a filing fee and get on the ballot with no other rigmarole or BS is Colorado. Everywhere else, there is a need to meet an artificially controlled signature threshold. And as we are seeing in Atlanta with Cop City, signing petitions is not effective democracy if the government ignores those petitions and the cops dox people. It's really important to keep all of that in mind. And that's going to make it that much harder to get people on the ballot as people become concerned about signing petitions, because now they're worried about getting docked. Hello, Alex. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. Thank you.
Yeah, somebody recently bought me a mic, and I'm going to try to plug it in on the computer, see if it works okay.
Sounds good. Let us know.
I'll put my camera up in a second. It's my birthday today.
Happy birthday, Alex.
Thanks, man. The big 3-9.
I feel old.
Let me look for this mic. I'll be right back.
Of course. And I've been thinking about education a lot, even before Alex suggested coming on to talk about education in Florida. Because it occurs to me more and more that the people who defend public schools, which they should, and we all should, don't really have an answer for what they think our schooling policy should be, which leaves us open to the criticism that only the charter school grifters and the religious school fascists have any plan for schooling. And sometimes it feels like that's true. And I think about that a lot lately. And thinking about that a lot lately, it concerns me when I see a lack of concern for what people say about education and educational policy among comrades. That's another reason why I lean towards the PSL ticket this election, and why I remind people
When
that our electoral system isn't fair. Hello, Alex.
just in case when I plugged in the mic, I couldn't hear you anymore. So I just got this mic. I'll figure this out later. As long as you can hear me okay.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Sorry, I came in a little late. So I want to talk to you about two different things, and feel free to ask me what you like. I wanted to first talk to you about the hearing of the status hearing of the Uhuru 3.
Yes, that's worth catching up on. For people who don't understand, Uhuru is a black communist party in Florida that is being prosecuted by the FBI as Russian agents, despite the fact that it's allegedly, conservative white Republicans who wanted to elect Trump that were the Russian agents. But black communists are the only folks that the Justice Department can actually find to charge for this.
Yeah, and they have headquarters in 3 different states: Oakland, California, St. Louis, Missouri, and St. Pete, Florida. Their 2 primary headquarters are in the Midwest and here in Florida. And those were the 2 headquarters last year that was raided by the feds. They found no material evidence to support the basis that they are agents for a foreign power from those raids and the documents that they found. The indictment is absurd. It's unprecedented. It's dangerous. It violates the First Amendment. I think their defense team did a good job of presenting that based on the status hearing or the motion to dismiss that I witnessed, that I went to Tampa to show support for this past Thursday. Uhuru, which in Swahili means freedom, also known as the African People's Socialist Party, is a movement that has been in existence for over 50 years, which is led by Chairman O'Malley. O'Malley was peacefully protesting back in the 70s in St. Pete and was arrested and sentenced to 5 years as a result. So here we are, a man well into his 80s, and they're trying to potentially convict him for another 10 years in prison for the crime of not registering as a foreign agent. Something I forgot to mention in my blog about this hearing is that the prosecution actually corrected themselves and said, well, nobody really registers as a foreign agent. What is notification. And they gave the criteria of what you have to say to notify if you're working at the behest of a foreign country. And the defense said, then why didn't you just provide a letter and see if Uhuru could comply? Why'd you have to raid them? Why'd you have to make a federal charge against them? And also there was a distinction. I don't know if you read my blog. Did you read my blog about the case?
I'm behind on my reading this week. I was sick a couple of days, and I've been doing a lot of laying around and not doing much.
That's okay. I'm glad you're feeling better. And so there's a distinction between political speech and action.
Yes.
Overt action, right? And so they were citing the case of a Palestinian in Chicago, a journalist. I don't remember his name, but this Palestinian was caught doing acts of espionage, looking in on dissidents, Iraqi dissidents, on behalf of Saddam Hussein in the United States. He was caught doing those nefarious or overt acts. It wasn't just a question of articles that were sympathetic to the Ba'ath Party in Iraq. And so they said they have to demonstrate in the indictment both, not even political speech. You're not supposed to touch that. You're supposed to show overt acts or nefarious acts at the behest of a foreign government. And that isn't even mentioned in the indictment. The only thing that's covered in the indictment is political speech. And the fact that the chairman who went to several countries, Spain, Ireland, African countries, etc., countries that were in support of reparations for African people in the United States. So as part of his world tour, he had went back in 2015. This is pre-Ukrainian invasion to a trip to Moscow. And they tried to use that to say that he's working at the behest of the Russians, because this gentleman that he met in Moscow apparently is connected to the FSB. That wasn't very clear either. And so, but what the defense was stressing is that the Supreme Court has consistently said that unless there are acts on the behalf of that state that haven't been informed to the US Attorney General, that political speech doesn't count. Political speech is supposed to be protected under the First Amendment.
And how would you? And you would have to prove, I would think, that the acts were actually on behalf of that state, not just congruent with the perceived desires of that state. Because, I mean, being a foreign agent doesn't mean that you agree or sympathize with another country. Being a foreign agent means that you are working actively on behalf of another country. That's why you're supposed to notify people. That way they know without assuming that you're a secret agent, and then apply, so they don't have to, in theory, apply our sophisticated counterintelligence apparatus against you. And it seems like the whole point here is to apply that counterintelligence apparatus with no evidence. Because let's remember, you said they didn't find any evidence. You said their indictment is all about political speech.
Correct.
If the indictment is you didn't properly notify us that you were working for the Russians, then shouldn't the language of the indictment say, and they did this for the Russians, and we know because, and then give evidence?
Yeah, something else I've got to mention, because there was so much. The judge at one point asked the defense a pretty absurd question. This is not to say the judge's not going to decide the right way, because in the end, the judge looked impressed by their arguments. But he asked them a kind of absurd question at the beginning. And he said, what if I took out all the contents of these articles that are cited in the indictment? These are Uhuru articles from their Uhuru newspapers. What if I took all the content out so the jurors would not see it, and it would just be on his face political speech that they're interpreting as acts? And they said, Your Honor, the whole point is the content of these articles. Uhuru has always, long before they had any contact with the Russian, has consistently been a critic of U.S. foreign policy and against NATO and expansion, long before the invasion of Ukraine. And so that kind of put the rest with what the judge was saying, because it has to do with the content. And they also, a very good example, Mr. Goodman, who was the head of the defense, he did a great job. He gave us an example. He said the Brookings Institute receives millions of dollars annually from the Emirati government. And by the way, they're talking about a total over the course of 7 years, about $7,000.
Yeah, that's not very much.
Yeah, that's $1,000 a year. And they proved that most of that money went towards a 4-city trip. So when the Russian national came to the United States and wanted to give speeches with Uhuru in support of reparations or whatnot, that money that he was providing was for trips, mostly, and that's completely legal. They're a nonprofit.
So it's
billions from foreign governments,
So it's not even cash. So
I'm not sure how the money was transferred. But the point is, they're not hiding the fact that they're a nonprofit and they're able to take money from foreign countries. Completely legal.
Well, but that also, I mean, if you're going to be saying that so and so is a foreign agent, then you have to show how and why they're acting. Well, how they're acting on behalf of a foreign government, and how that foreign government is dictating their actions. Because remember, being an agent means actively pursuing the foreign government's agenda in the United States.
Yes, and they don't always agree with them.
Coincidentally benefiting them.
They don't always agree with the Russians. That was brought up as well. For example, this Russian national asked the chairman if he could appear in California with a separatist group. Mm-hmm. I don't know what separatist group this was.
There's several California secession movements.
Right. And so he refused. He said, no, we're not your employees. We're your allies. We're not going to show up at this event if that separatist group is there. And the Russian national had to submit to what the chairman wanted. That doesn't sound like a relationship that's like an employee or an agent. And also in the indictment itself, it says likely FSB. For those that don't know, FSB is kind of like the KGB of today. It's the Russian intelligence.
Russian secret police
that he met is likely FSB. So they didn't even prove that he was directly with the state.
This is where it gets all confusing. Just to clarify, the FSB is the portion of the KGB that was civilian run and was focused on political security and secret police and things like that.
I didn't know that. So the FSB also existed during the Soviet times.
Well, the FSB was part of the KGB during the Soviet times and is one of the agencies that has broken off from the KGB since. But it's really important to understand that in context of the U.S. agencies, when you say KGB, the average American thinks CIA, whereas FSB is actually closer in practice to FBI.
Right.
The agency in Russia that is closest to what CIA does is the SVR, which is the portion of what used to be the KGB that is now in theory run by the military and is primarily concerned with foreign intelligence gathering.
Right. And so, whether or not, he had some connection to the FSB, they did not prove that they worked on behalf of him, that they were under his control. The indictment does not prove that. The indictment does not prove, that they were acting in a nefarious manner, doing acts of espionage on Russian dissidents in the United States. Nothing of the sort. They only talked about political articles and political speeches, which are protected under the First Amendment. But look, the United States lately has been doing unprecedented acts. Look at the Assange case. Look at the Alex Suarez case. They have no respect. The U.S. government has no respect for diplomats, no respect for journalists, no respect for activist groups.
I will quibble a little bit on the idea that Assange is unprecedented. Mumia Abu-Jamal is still in jail. It's not unprecedented at all for the U.S. to go after journalists.
Well, the difference with Mumia is that they set him up to make it look like he killed a police officer.
Well, but again, the whole thing
with publishing an article that was truthful.
Remember, a great deal. The whole point of Russiagate was to smear WikiLeaks and Assange as Russian agents rather than committed and principled opponents of American foreign policy and the damage it does around the world. Now, I am an agnostic in many ways on the question of who and what Assange's political identity are. I have heard conflicting things.
I think he's intentionally vague on that because he wants to get as much support as possible.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to think, his core values are progressive. But I think when he's given statements, he's intentionally been kind of vague because he relies on support of right-wing libertarians, not necessarily because he agrees with them, but they're helping him.
And that has always been the concern in the U.S., that his Australian core support originally was from groups of right-wing libertarians who were not necessarily sympathetic to the plight of the marginalized.
Absolutely, but that's all Assange has done. He helped spark the Arab Spring. He's revealed things to the third world, to the oppressed people, to the marginalized, to help them free themselves. And he hasn't tried to take credit for it, like the white hero complex. I don't see Assange like that at all. He's revealed the information to these people and let them decide for themselves what they want to free themselves. And so I think WikiLeaks and his leadership of WikiLeaks has been pivotal to helping to inspire people based on the truth, based on these revelations, to do these acts.
And that's fair. And you can't really blame Assange, who has been either in isolation in an embassy or imprisoned all this time, for the ridiculousness of some of his more annoying and strident right-wing supporters on Twitter.
Well, I told Max Blumenthal in a tweet once, because he gave a speech in support of Assange, and in the same speech, in the same sentence actually, that he said free Assange, he said, and down with the vaccines. I'm like, you know how much that hurts your case? It has nothing to do with Assange. I got pissed. And not only that, was around the time that they were saying that there was a COVID outbreak in the prison where Assange was. and Assange has a lung condition. So they were urging him to go to, house arrest or a hospital or safer area. And at that time, while they're saying it's so dangerous, this COVID, Max is coming up and giving a speech and saying, "Oh, free Assange and down with the vaccines."
I can't even, I cannot take Max Blumenthal seriously anymore. Yeah. He seems to be trying to walk back some of the dumber things that he did in the last 6 to 8 months or more, last year maybe. But at the same time, he hasn't walked back. He's backed away, as far as I can tell, from LaRouchites and the People's Party. But at the same time, he's refusing to acknowledge that LaRouchites or the People's Party are in any way bad, or that he in any way helped them. And he's still doubling down on their issues, like and pandering after the approval of Tucker Carlson.
Absolutely. And I think he wanted to support Bobby Kennedy Jr. But what happened was he challenged him to a debate. For once, Max was willing to a debate, because I've challenged him to a debate. And Kennedy initially accepted the invitation, and then one of his staff members apparently called Max and said it's off last moment. And of course, it was going to be over the question of Israel, right? Because Max is an anti-Zionist Jew, and Bobby Kennedy is very pro-Zionist.
Yes.
This disappointed Max, because I think Max wanted to support Bobby Kennedy Jr. Max didn't like the Cornel West left MPP. This is just a fact.
The trouble is that Max wants to have it both ways. He wants to be able to agree with the right wingers on a bunch of things, and he wants to be able to say that the right are where all the real progressives are in all these meaningful ways. And at the same time, he wants to back away when these groups expose themselves for as toxic as they really are. Does Max not actually understand that toxicity is who these folks are?
And also, like, tactically, you could argue, and I don't agree with this, but tactically, you could argue that, okay, we're not going to talk about the trans issue because it's going to defend some of our allies, right? I disagree with that. But some of them could argue that, right?
Allies is it going to offend?
The thing is, they're not allies. But I'm saying they're actually saying transphobic things. They're actually joining the right in the transphobic rhetoric. So that's even worse. Both are wrong. I'm just saying what they're doing is even worse.
Oh no, they're doubling and tripling down on it in some cases. Anya's really become outspoken on that. It's
a shame, because they do good journalism. For example, Anya was at the hearing of Tampa. She was in the hearing in Miami for Alex Saab. They also do bad journalism.
So I don't want to give them too much credit for good journalism, because they also do really awful stunts, like Max going to the richest neighborhood in Caracas and saying, "Look, they don't feel the sanctions here in Venezuela."
Well, that was contradictory too, because
he's also trying to say sanctions are bad at the same time.
Well, I know,
but he's also saying, but they're not actually hurting Venezuela anyway.
That was a contradiction, because if you speak to the Chavistas, they'll tell you the extent of the damage of the sanctions, and UN Reports backs this up.
And so that's why I never really understood that stunt.
Right. I think what he was trying to do was kind of, and I'm not justifying what he did, I disagree with that, but I think what he was trying to do was mock those that say that there's shortages by going to the areas where there's not shortages. But that, again, is a contradiction, because at that time, the economy's bettered a little bit now, but at that time, the majority of the areas in Caracas were suffering from the sanctions.
Well, and that's really the whole thing, is that was what made it so offensive. He deliberately went to a place that was not suffering in one of the hardest hit places in the country overall. But anyway, that's me. I actually should get to Eugene's comment here. I had asked while it was still in the air whether you were coming or not. You've got some echo. Could you mute your mic?
Oh, let me turn the fan off. It's probably just the fan in my room.
No, I'm getting an echo.
All right, let me turn the mic off and turn it back on. Hold on.
Let's see. Testing.
Is it better now?
Testing. Maybe it's a delay on my side.
Okay, I can hear you fine. You can hear me okay now?
I can hear you okay, but I'm double hearing myself, which I don't like, and I don't see why.
I would turn your I would turn your mic off and back on again. That might help.
Does that make a difference? No, I'm still hearing echo. That's weird. You're not hearing it?
No, I don't hear it at all. So you're saying before.
So anyway, I'll get
before
back.
I came on, you were talking about what happened in Canada. Is that what that comment's about?
I was asking about does anybody have anything in the news that they wanted my thoughts on? This is because the Canadians. I don't know who had this stupid idea that it was a good idea in the first place. I have to assume Chrystia Freeland, but who knows?
Well, her grandfather was a Nazi collaborator too.
Yes, he was, and she's gone to a great effort to minimize Nazi collaborations and what's the word I'm looking for?
Sanitize it?
Boost and sanitize Nazism, yes.
Right. Well, I called it Canada's Guaido moment, right? You remember when, all those people in the U.S. Congress were standing in ovation for that fascist. So now it's happened in Canada, and Trudeau was forced to apologize. But it's funny because in his apology, he still blamed it on Russia.
That's hilarious, but unsurprising. But the decision to blame that stuff on Russia is just still ignoring the fact that there's a reason there are a bunch of Nazis in Calgary. And it's because the Canadian government and corporations associated with the Canadian government wanted reliable anti-communists to break strikes. And you see the same thing in the United States. There are a bunch of people, second and third generation Ukrainians in Queens and Yonkers who were put there to offset the fact that the local Ukrainian American population was really left wing, and they wanted these anti-communists and Nazis in those neighborhoods on purpose to make the community more right wing. It's funny, one of the first national newspapers in Canada warning that all these Nazis were being brought in under guise of being reliable anti-communists was a left-wing Ukrainian national group.
Right.
So it's weird how times change. Now any mention of Nazis is somehow anti-Ukrainian.
Even Guaido calls himself a liberal. You know what I mean? It's like a lot of these liberals are the new fascists. They try to even say the word progressive, but what they're advocating is for a foreign invasion of their own country and sanctions that are genocidal against the working class and poor people of that country. So they're acting for the elites. They're acting for the corporations. They're traitors of their own nation. And so, behind closed doors, they're fascists. If you look at the reality of their policies that they advocate, but openly they use the rhetoric of liberals or progressives. And I'm not saying that about all the opposition. I'm talking about the most extreme elements of the Venezuelan opposition, with people like Guaido who've been thrown out by the opposition for going too far. And so now there's apparently no president of Venezuela, an invisible president, since they still won't work with Maduro. They won't free Americans that are held in Venezuela, who are criminals, by the way, but they won't do a prisoner exchange. They won't still release Alex Saab. This is the absurdity of what's going on.
Well,
I can't hear you.
Americans in prison overseas are never supposed to be criminals. They're all hostages, remember?
Oh, right.
And if they are freed, someone will be angry that we gave up this horrible criminal for this innocent person.
Right.
The last prisoner exchange with Iran, people were really upset. People on the right and even some supposed liberal foreign policy people were really upset. that we were letting terrorists go in exchange for innocent people who, and it's like, if they're innocent people, shouldn't we be getting them out?
Well, I think, and tell me if I'm wrong, and you have very good memory for historical occurrences, so tell me if I'm wrong, but I think that Golda Meir, when she was prime minister of Israel, when she ran for re-election after the Munich debacle, where those Israeli Olympians were murdered, she would negotiate to have them released or do any prisoner exchange with Palestinians. After that debacle, I believe she lost her re-election campaign, so it backfired for her. Isn't that correct?
I'd have to look it up.
This was in the 70s, yeah.
Possible.
Yeah. But, I mean, so a lot of times by not negotiating, it can also backfire for you politically. That's the point.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But back to Eugene's comments here, I think that there's something natural about that. You want to cheer for the people who are fighting your enemies, but at the same time, you have to think, how could they be so stupid? And it really shows how little they actually care about Nazism and how focused they are on the narrative that they're telling right now. Because the only people who fought the Soviet Union in World War II outside of Finland and Poland were absolutely Nazis. And you could make good arguments.
The Italians fought in Stalingrad.
In Finland and Poland, most interested in fighting the Soviets were Nazis.
Well, you know what's interesting, Chris, also is the Japanese fought the Russians before when they had the Tsar.
Yes.
But they did not fight them at all in World War II. When the Russians finally entered the Pacific Theater, they set off the nuclear bomb, right? So there was no battle between the Japanese and the Russians. They pushed them out of Manchuria, but it was very minimal battles, I think. That was the only time there was an engagement between Japanese and Russians during World War II that I know of.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, good. I was worried for a moment. Okay, so what's interesting about that is we were very much scared of a Russian invasion of Korea or Manchuria and Japan surrendering to the USSR instead of the US.
Correct.
That was one of the reasons the bombs were dropped.
Yeah, they don't touch that on the Oppenheimer film, but that was one of the motivations.
That's one of the failures of the Oppenheimer film. The Oppenheimer film is too much about Oppenheimer and not enough about the historical context of the time and the events.
I mean, I can understand that there were some people that were, more in the communist camp that were so desperate to defeat Nazi Germany that they would get behind the idea of a nuclear bomb.
Well,
Japan. And later, the only enemy they could have used it against was the Japanese.
Well, but this really comes down to it, is the whole, the Manhattan Project started as, oh my gosh, we have to do this before the Nazis. And then by the time it actually did anything, the Nazis were pretty much over and done with.
Yep.
And so the military was like, well, we have these bombs. We've got to use these bombs, because that's how the military thinks.
Yeah.
And the government, by the government, I mean the Truman administration and the foreign policy establishment around him, which was composed very much of people who had been anti-FDR in the early 30s and had only become pro-FDR after it became clear that they couldn't get rid of him in any way.
Right.
And so those folks were very anti-communist and anti-Soviet and even anti-liberal in some ways. And so they were very, very much against Truman supporting any pro-independence movements of any kind overseas. And they were very scared of the idea of the Japanese surrendering to the Soviets.
Absolutely. And yeah, the film made it more about personalities. It was great acting, great writing, but they should have also showed the policies that were the agenda that was involved in the in the eventual act, coming about in the eventual act of using the bomb in Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
But hey, it got released at the same time as Barbie and became a great meme, so everything worked out well.
I slept through most of Barbie. I got pressured into going to it because I already saw an Oppenheimer.
But
I didn't really enjoy Barbie that much.
And yet, I'm not trying to praise Barbie. And yet, Barbie is a more serious movie that says more serious things than Oppenheimer.
Well, yeah, it says some serious things about gender and all that.
But I mean, regardless of whether you think that it does it well or not, it's important to remember that Barbie is a more serious movie than Oppenheimer.
I love the Peaky Blinders. That series really gave Cillian Murphy stardom, the guy who plays Oppenheimer. I love how Peaky Blinders puts at the center for once in British television, because the British television loves to show the elites and how the rich live, the royals, but it actually puts at the center working class family, a working class family.
Because the organized crime in the UK has always been associated with the working class and the lower end of the middle class. And especially as the British ruling class wants you to think about it. So it's worth noting that it's by showing the working class in association with crime, it's kind of doing the same thing that Fox News does when it runs the repeated coverage of black people committing violent crime, and then talks about how we need more cops all the time.
A couple of episodes I liked of Peaky Blinders is because the irony of it. One time, Cillian Murphy, who's Irish in real life, was having a conversation with the Irishman, and he said, "I don't want to know anything about Ireland." And then they had another scene where Adrian Brody, who plays an Italian, even though he's Jewish, he plays an Italian gangster who's dealing with Cillian Murphy's character.
It should be noted that Jewish actors playing Italian characters goes at least as far back as Peter Falk in 1940s and 50s gangster movies before he became Columbo.
Right, I remember he became
Peter Falk is Jewish.
Right.
James Caan.
What I'm trying to say is there's a scene where Adrian Brody is trying to have a bunch of Italians pass as Jews against one of his rivals. And so Adrian Brody is, well, a lot of us Italians look Jewish. So I thought that was ironic.
Which again, it's sort of raising a joke about the fact that Jewish actors play Italian people and vice versa all the time in American TV and movies.
That's correct. They're both
Peter Falk and James Caan are two of the best examples I can think of.
What was the name of that movie? That Greek American, it was a Greek American filmmaker that made a movie with Peter Falk. It was about three guys. I think it's called The Three Gentlemen or something. It's about these guys that their best friend dies, and it starts out with the funeral, and then they go off on a trip to England and have sex and get drunk and do all these crazy things.
Sure.
And it has the Greek filmmaker himself in it. He's one of the protagonists with Peter Falk and another gentleman.
No, I don't.
Very well made film. You haven't seen that one?
I don't know that one.
Yeah, I can look up the name. He's a pretty famous Greek American filmmaker from back in the day.
Oh,
Peter Falk. Let me see. Greek filmmaker. If I tell you the name, you'll recognize it.
Also true. Harvey Keitel is Jewish and plays Italian mobsters. He also plays Irish cops. So, I mean, he really covers the whole gambit.
Right.
So you also wanted to talk about education in Florida, if I remember our conversation correctly.
Yes. I'm just looking up the name.
Of course.
Okay, Cassavetes. You've heard of Cassavetes.
Oh, John Cassavetes, yeah.
Yes. John Cassavetes did a really good film with Peter Falk. Yeah.
That's interesting.
So anyways, I'll go into what happened and why, I don't know if you read the statement, but why I ended up resigning from my job.
Which job was that?
What's that?
Which job was that?
Okay, yeah. So I was working for the past 6 months, including in the summer, as a substitute teacher. I could pick the assignments I wanted. I never did a history class because that's against my principles with the DeSantis policy. But because of the amount of vacancies, because of teachers quitting over these crazy educational policies in the public schools, I ended up becoming a substitute teacher, and I would teach classes like literature using my communication background, ESL, English second language, Spanish for Spanish-speaking students, things like that. And the job in the first few months was going well. But then I had to end up work with permanent, they call them paraprofessionals or aides. And because even though technically I was their boss as a substitute teacher in a long-term position that I took, they acted like the boss over me. And I felt discriminated against and harassed. And it's a long story, but basically you have no rights when you're a sub. You have to be subservient to the administrators and to the people that you work with. I had no major issues with the students. I loved educating the students. My issue was with some of the people that I worked with. And you would get in trouble as a sub. The company, by the way, is ESS. They're throughout the country, and they work in several counties here in Florida. But like ESS would be contacted, for example, by a school principal. And the school principal doesn't know that the bookkeeper who's in charge of the subs had given the okay for something. For example, let's say I'm supposed to clock out at 3:10. I did everything I'm supposed to. I show up at the office with the keys at 3 o'clock. They tell me when they take the keys, "You're good to go, sir. You can leave." "Are you sure? There's nothing else you need before?" "You can go." And then what happens? The principal sees that I left 10 minutes early and contacts ESS. Then I get interrogated. My assignments are all canceled, and I have to wait till they want to give me my job back. That's how ridiculous it is. And so the level of complaints, which were all minor complaints because I do my job pretty good, but because there was so many in a short amount of time, they wanted me to sign something that said if there's one more complaint, I'm fired, which is ridiculous. So, at that point, I said, I'm setting myself up for failure here. I might as well quit. And I listed in my resignation letter that I revealed in my blog all the reasons why I was coming to that decision. And there was instances, and I think I sent you the picture of it a couple months ago, where me as a sub, sometime would also act as an aide, depending on what assignments were available at what school. I worked throughout the county, the district. But for example, one time they wanted me to move some books that they were getting rid of. And I saw a book of Anne Frank, and I took a picture of it. One thing is that you hear about these things, right? We know DeSantis is covering up the Holocaust. We know that they won't touch on slavery only to say that it's a benefit for blacks. It was a benefit for blacks. But to actually see them getting rid of the Anne Frank diary or Anne Frank books like this, it was very emotional. I had to keep my mouth shut, right? Because if I speak out, ESS would probably fire me there and then.
It's interesting how some of this stuff fits together. Because one of the things that was in the news back when it happened was an op-ed with Cornel West's name on it as a co-author, praising Ron DeSantis on education in Florida.
Well, now, the title to that, Cornel West said later, he had no control over, and it was misleading.
It's true. Yeah. Now, I also want to say that I don't believe that, having read the article and having compared it to other articles by the CEO of the organization that is really praising DeSantis in all of those op-eds, is the one who wrote the one with Cornel West's name on it too. It reads the same as his other articles praising DeSantis. My problem is not that I believe that Cornel West supports it or that I think that he agrees with it. My problem is that Cornel West is in a position where his name was on it and doesn't seem to think that's a problem.
I think
that's not my real issue, and I don't want to get sidetracked into talking.
No, I don't mind talking about it. I think one of the mistakes that Cornel West makes, because I've been familiar with him a long time, I met him once. One of the mistakes that he makes is, for example, there was a book, I don't remember the name, but it was a biography of Malcolm X. Mm-hmm. Not autobiography, it was a biography written by an intellectual. And this book actually was making claims about Malcolm X that were not true. But it was a significantly large book. I believe it was about 600 pages. And there was a black intellectual that was complaining that Cornel West had put his approval of the book. He didn't write the book, but he wrote like a nice review of it. And he was saying Cornel West apparently didn't read this whole book because there are claims in there about Malcolm X I think that Cornel West would disagree with. And so you have three instances, at least three instances. I don't want to exaggerate. There could be more. Three instances that I know of where Cornel West is associated with the wrong people. Well, that we just mentioned, MPP, and then where he gave his approval to that book. And we're all human, but that he needs to work on not associating with certain people.
I understand why this happens. I just don't understand why other people don't think about what it means. It happens because liberals in academia who have a certain personal reputation have opportunities to make money by lending their name to various organizations and studies and papers with some sort of political or social agenda.
Right.
Now, I am told by people who think highly of West and who don't want to view him in a negative light that West deliberately engages some of these organizations in order to influence them in ways that causes them to do less damage.
Well, I'll put it this way.
Maybe that is or is not true, and I don't want to get into that question too much either. What I want to say is he participates in the basic liberal money-making activity.
Well, let me put it this way.
Leads to the conflicts in the first place.
Let me ask you, let me put this into perspective. Whenever they ask the MAGA, I call them MAGA commies, not because I have disdain for communism, but because they're not real communists. Yes. So the MAGA commies, whenever they're asked on Fox or whenever they appear, what they think of Trump, they say he's the best, he's this, he's that.
Yeah.
Every single time that they've brought Cornel West on the air, up until recently, including on Fox,
sure,
that they asked him what he thinks of Trump, the first words out of his mouth are neo-fascist.
Well, yeah.
So nobody can say that he's trying to appeal to the right or to Trump supporters by compromising his principles, like MAGA communists.
I just think Cornel West is more a creature of the liberal faux left than he is of the real class conscious left.
And I hope he finds a vice president that's more radical than him. If he finds a good vice president, that could make a big difference as well. Because what's the alternative here? Alternative is Bobby Kennedy, who's crazy.
Well,
what's her name?
I'll be completely. I was saying before you came on that if we were in a democratic country, the Party for Socialism and Liberation would be on the ballot in all 50 states.
Right, and they're not.
Now, I'm not a PSL member. I have criticisms of the PSL when it comes to some of their foreign policy praise of specific countries totally uncritically, though I do want to say that it's very important when you talk about China's participation in international capitalism or North Korea's alleged political repression, that these are situations the United States has forced these countries into. The North Korea has been punished for not participating in international capitalism the way China has by complete isolation, whereas China has been threatened into participation in international capitalism with the threat, we're going to treat you like we treat North Korea and Cuba if you don't do this.
Also, I disagree with PSL on their characterization of Russia. I'm actually more in line with the Orthodox Trotskyists on that question, because PSL says that Russia's imperialist. I don't think it is. I don't think imperialist kind of is, but it's not an imperialist country either.
So I believe in general that the Trotskyist analysis of Putin is pretty good. At the same time, I'm less concerned about the poor American understanding of Russia than I am about the poor American understanding of America. And Eugene is saying, is the most important electoral battle over school boards? And I would say absolutely yes. If people have been watching mainstream media, they might know who Congressman Byron Donalds is. Byron Donalds is a Republican from Naples, Florida, who is very popular in MAGA circles and makes news on mainstream media as one of the Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert type Republicans associated with Greene and Gates a lot. But the way that Byron Donalds got into politics was that he and his wife started a Christian charter school. And the reason he and his wife started a Christian charter school is his wife, Erica, became active with a group to start a Christian charter school because the public schools of Naples were failing parents and students, as they put it. And she got elected to the school board, and they founded a Christian charter school that got state money instead of the public schools they were mad at. And then that public school disintegrated in a very public scandal, but it left Erica and her husband with political clout.
You're saying that it's more important, the local politics, the school board. I disagree because the policy comes from Tallahassee, right? I'll give you an example.
But Erica Donalds built the school in Naples and was elected to the school board in Naples and convinced Tallahassee, as part of an organized group of conservative school board members that was astroturfed to a great deal, but which she deliberately founded to make it look like there was a disagreement among school board members in Florida as to whether public school was a social good.
Well, I'm unaware of that case. It is possible school boards can influence Tallahassee.
But these groups start at the local level, where local people with power say they want the government out of their business, and then it goes up to the top level where suddenly the government is in everybody else's business in the name of getting out of these rich people's business.
So anyway, I wanted to mention, I heard from another sub since I revealed my resignation in Florida. And I'm not going to reveal their name, but I heard their story. And what happened with them was they decided to pick up a history assignment. They shouldn't have, and they're progressive like me. And when they did the history assignment in front of the teacher's aide, they told the students when it was time to talk about Andrew Jackson what the textbook said, which was nice things about Andrew Jackson. But then the teacher, the substitute teacher, added on their own commentary saying, however, if you were Native American or Black, you wouldn't necessarily think that way of Andrew Jackson. Just for saying that, the aide left the classroom.
Yes.
All of a sudden, the principal and a policeman from the school came and started interrogating the teacher. And then the teacher, quit that assignment. And the sad thing is that the principal was African American.
So the system does not care about the identity of its membership unless it is to show that it cannot possibly be racist because Black people in the system do bad things too.
Tokenism.
Well, look at that Memphis case, the police brutality case in Memphis, where they're charging 5 Black cops to protect one white cop who was also there and in charge.
The white cop was in charge, and he was also involved, and he didn't get any charges.
No, and they're still protecting him, but they're charging all the Black cops.
And they have different unions than the white cops too.
Don't get me started on that, because let's keep in mind that police unions are one of the strongholds of Nazi organizations. But
I heard that the Black police unions are weaker than the white police unions, which is part of the reason why they don't get as good legal representation. They get in more trouble, the Black cops.
Exactly, and the official unions controlled by white cops don't really help the Black cops at all. That's why Black cops had to found their own groups.
Segregation is still around, but it's within the police departments.
And this is the system. This is the system that they want to translate to the schools, because after that first charter school that she and her husband founded broke down, Erica Donalds didn't give up. She got
talking about in Naples, right?
Yes.
Okay.
She got together with a private college in Michigan called Hillsdale College, which doesn't receive any federal student aid money at all, so that it can ignore federal anti-discrimination laws.
Right.
So she went and she got the money to start a chain of private schools in Florida that gets state money instead of public schools from a pro-discrimination Christian school in Michigan. So it's local, but it's also not local. She's being invested in by a school with fascist sympathies. And Erica Donalds and
it's corporate socialism.
Yes. Well,
don't mind
it's not corporate socialism. It's fascism. I hate
for
it
their
when
own
people
agenda,
say
right?
corporate socialism. There's no such thing as corporate socialism. It's fascism. I think my sound is going. Can you hear me? I cannot hear you.
Well, it really pissed off the right when you say that, though. I say it to piss off the right, not that it's actually politically correct. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's the problem. Is I don't care if it pisses off the right. Calling it corporate socialism just keeps feeding the idea that socialism.
I can hear you. I was going to say Mussolini. You can't hear me. Let me turn my mic off and back.
I can hear you. Yeah. Can you hear me?
See, I'm in favor of. I was saying I'm in favor of abolishing corporations. Hello. I'm saying I'm in favor.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I'm just saying I'm in favor of abolishing the corporations, not having the government keep corporations in check, or have the corporation control the government, which is even worse. You just got to abolish those corporations and have them taken over by a workers. I'm for workers' democracy, essentially.
Well, I mean, but even beyond that, even if all the corporations became co-ops tomorrow, if you leave the system in place where all these corporations have to compete under cutthroat capitalism by the rules of capitalism, then things aren't actually going to get better for workers, because you're going to see co-ops have to make capitalist decisions.
Right.
So you actually have to do something about the toxic system of competition too. Because the economy needs to be cooperative. If we do not have a cooperative economy, that's the end of the ballgame.
Absolutely. I can stay for another 5 minutes just in case.
Well, I need to wrap up, and I want to finish the thought I was saying about education.
Okay. Yeah.
Erica Donalds and people from Hillsdale College are part of the CEO's organization with their names on the list along Cornell West. So the CEO of the organization is praising DeSantis because he is invested in the success of programs like DeSantis's. He expects to make money, and more importantly, while he makes money, he expects his politics to win.
Right.
And that's what we're up against. And they really, really seized on to education in this area, the same way that they have seized on to things like prisons in the past. And I predict that you're going to see you're going to see a world where all the schools are run either by churches or independent Christian groups associated with churches.
Are you talking about nationwide or in Florida?
Nationwide, if we let it happen.
Right.
Or they're going to be openly run by the same corporations that run prisons. And those are going to be our only choices to send our kids. And they're going to call it school choice.
Right.
And I think Florida is the model for that. And they're going to try to apply that in as many states as possible. And those are my final thoughts. Do you want to promote your book before we go?
Oh, yeah. Let me show it. I have a copy of it right here. So like Chris, I have a passion for history, and I've only ever written 2 fiction books. It's very hard to write fictitious literature. Both of them were alternative histories. We talked about Trotskyism earlier. So the other fiction that I wrote a couple books back, I've written 16 books, was called If Trotsky Won. This one is called If Che Won. And so it touches on Che's involvement in Africa. That's really where it starts, which is all factual. It's all actual things that Che said and did in the Congo. And then it goes into a scenario where he returns to Cuba, which he did. He returned to Cuba incognito, in secret, and then goes to fight in Bolivia. Although I put in there, I'm not giving it all away, certain things happening in that country different than what actually happened in the 1960s, resulting in a victory and the implications of that victory. Did Che's revolution spread to other Latin American nations or not? So that's what the book touches on. And the book should be, it was published quite recently. It should be translated to Spanish in the coming months. And people can order it on Amazon under my pen name, Alex Suarez, which is similar to my Twitter name that you can see here. Just with the number 2 to find me on Twitter if you don't follow me on there. And so, yeah, I think the book can be inspirational. There's a lot of facts in it. It's showing what could have been different and what would the implications be for that at that time. So,
well, that sounds like something that I would recommend people check out if they're interested in history and the implications of what another successful socialist revolution in Latin America in the 60s would have been.
Also, I want to stress the point that Che was friends with Allende.
Yeah.
And people think, oh, Allende and Che must have hated each other because Che was for guerrilla warfare and Allende was for electoralism. That's not true. Che, when he gave a copy of guerrilla warfare to his friend Allende, when he signed it to him, he said that you're trying to do what we did in Cuba just by other means. So Che understood that the conditions of a certain country, Chile being more democratic than Bolivia was at the time, that you could take the electoral route. And that's the route that Chavez took 25 years after the coup in Chile. So,
and it should be noted, when considering whether Che or Allende was right, it should be noted that, yes, Allende won the presidential election, but the military killed him with the CIA's help and put Pinochet in charge as dictator.
Well, remember, Chavez, when he came to power, was a leftist military man, and he successfully politicized the military in Venezuela, which they did not do in Chile, which made it more susceptible to a U.S.-backed coup back in 1973.
But then he never used his politicized and revolutionized military to successfully deal with his political issues. He simply bought off his political opponents, and that just sort of kicked the can down the road while putting the government in more of a hole.
Well, I wouldn't say he bought them off. What he did was he formed a coalition. And so the United Socialist Party of Venezuela is actually a coalition of several small third parties that existed in Venezuela in the 90s. And he used his leadership skills to help unite those different factions. But he, for example, to invade another nation, he never used the military to persecute his political opponents. That military was there to prevent a foreign.
But here's the thing, and this part is important. When we say that he never used his military to persecute his political opponents, we're saying that from an American point of view. It's also important to understand that from a Venezuelan socialist point of view, he never used his military to directly defend the revolution from anti-communist elements.
Yeah, I mean, they're probably more hardline Chavistas that were disappointed that he didn't use the military more. But Chavez really respected democracy and the democratic system. And
I understand respecting democracy and the democratic system, and I'm not saying that we don't need a democratic society. Mm-hmm. But one of the ways that you protect a democratic society is to use a revolutionized military against counter-revolutionary elements.
Oh yeah, that's what they did in Cuba. And there's a similar criticism of Maduro today, that he's too soft on the opposition, that there's no death penalty.
I know that everybody calls Castro authoritarian, and I'm not saying Castro was perfect. And I'm not saying that repression is good or that we should be locking everybody up for opposition.
Right.
But there needs to be a committed. If you want to make a nation socialist, there needs to be a commitment to institutional anti-fascism enforced by the military in the last resort.
And look at Nicaragua, right? Nicaragua was different than Venezuela or Cuba, for example. Yes. Nicaragua, kind of more similar to Cuba than Venezuela, Nicaragua, in the sense that their militias, their Sandinista militias, then became the traditional military. Yes. Because before that, the traditional military was supporting the Somoza regime that they overthrew in a revolution. But thank you so much for having me on, Chris. Keep in touch.
Thank you very much for coming back on, Alex. I think it was a great show. I hope you have a great week. Take care. And on that note, to everyone else, I would like to go ahead and say thanks for joining us. Thanks for bearing with me at the beginning on the solo run. Thanks for sticking around for Alex and I's conversation. And I want to note that I really am concerned less about the individual membership of Cornel West in the CLT organization than I am in the overall movement of which the CLT organization is a part, and the way that members of this movement talk to each other, and the fact that we do not have a meaningful response to this movement at any sort of organized level, because we've largely been focused on other things. I think schooling is the left hand of policing, and that we should talk about schooling as much as policing. And on that note, I hope everybody has a great week, and I'll tweet at you.